Looks good. Okay. So sort of a broad overview. First, just a little bit about BARC. We're a Portland-based nonprofit that works to defend forests surrounding Mount Hood. And for the past 20 years, ground truthing or field checking has been really central to our work. And so we train volunteers to conduct ecological surveys and propose logging projects. Projects that are proposed by the U.S. Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management on federal lands. And the information that those volunteers collect goes into BARC's outreach, our NEPA work, and sometimes into litigation. And you know, every project that we look at is different, but over the years we've gotten thousands of acres of logging dropped from projects that are proposed by the agencies using ground truthing as a tool. And this area in this photo is included in that. This is a photo of the Grasshopper timber sale, which is a current east side Mount Hood project. And this photo was taken in a late successional reserve, and a volunteer, Jordana here, is measuring a Doug fir in a late successional reserve that it's actually too big for the diameter tape to go all the way around. So let's talk more about that. So the question about sort of the types of projects and what we're sort of seeing on the ground, we mostly look at projects that are proposed on Mount Hood National Forest, although we do monitor some of the surrounding BLM lands. And this map on the left-hand side of the screen shows all the current planning areas that the Forest Service has under analysis. And so you can see at one time there's a pretty large percentage of the national forest that's under analysis in terms of the project areas. And so a lot of ground to cover. And the Forest Service, unfortunately, doesn't always have the capacity and will to do this properly, which is sort of where we come in. And another thing I'll say about this is, you know, within the last few years and under the Trump administration, the Forest Service and Mount Hood National Forest has increased their timber targets from 30 million board feet to 40 million board feet. So a pretty significant jump in their timber target there, which is concerning. This photo on the left is of the Crystal Clear timber sale, volunteers ground truthing in the Crystal Clear, which I think Brenna talked about on last week's Wildchat a little bit. And that's one of the projects that, like a lot of the yellow projects on this map, on the east side is sort of framed as having a fire and fuels reduction kind of rationale. And more on sort of the types of projects, the majority of the projects that we monitor are, they're mostly thinning projects, although I'd be willing to bet that, you know, the type of thing that happens in these projects is not really what people think of when they hear the word thinning. And so within each of these projects that we're monitoring, you know, there can be thousands of acres of deforestation that occurs with the gaps and the road building and the landings and, you know, et cetera. And the thinning itself is, you know, it's commercially driven, so it can be really aggressive. And almost every project that we're looking at nowadays includes components of, you know, quote unquote regeneration harvest and shelter wood harvest, which are, you know, basic euphemisms for clear cutting. These are just some other photos of some recent timber sales that we've done some post-logging monitoring in, showing some road building, some gaps. So in general, on the Mount Hood National Forest, the timber sales are getting bigger, and the Forest Service is more and more kind of oversimplifying the conditions that are occurring over these large areas. And this is a map of the Crystal Clear timber sale, which we just successfully litigated along with Cascadia Wildlands against, which is great. So this is an example of that. This is a project that was split up into 13,000 acres and put into basically, you know, just dry mixed conifer and moist mixed conifer is what this map shows, with essentially the same prescription for kind of across the boards, which to us really, it kind of oversimplifies the variation, it discounts the variation that exists on the ground, and how, you know, that variation would respond to logging. And this is one of the reasons we litigated on this project after ground truthing it, and one of the reasons that the Forest Service lost in court. It was very exciting. So I'll just talk a little bit about the second part of your question, which was sort of what are some of the sorts of things that we find on the ground compared to what is presented. And so the Crystal Clear project, these are photos that were taken in that project. And I put this up to highlight how, with these projects, the Forest Service always has their desired future conditions that they're trying to meet through logging. Is sort of always that requirement. And what we often notice when we go out to some of these areas is that those conditions a lot of times are already present. And so in our comments on the Crystal Clear project, we compared these photos on the left, which were in the analysis for Crystal Clear as their desired future conditions, to photos that we took in the units where they wanted to log to achieve those conditions. And it's almost like they took the photos in the same units. And this is unfortunately kind of all too common, especially in these projects that get really large like that, like Crystal Clear. And I just have a couple other examples. So the grasshopper timber sale, which I mentioned at the beginning, this is another project that has a lot of variation in its forest types and the cross elevational gradients. And on the right there is kind of an excerpt of the timber sale map. And I don't know how the color or the shading kind of shows up on people's screens, but the kind of more grayed out areas there are late successional reserves. So under the Northwest Forest Plan, late successional reserves, or LSRs, are areas that thinning can only happen when it can be demonstrated that it's needed to promote or accelerate old growth structure. And this was also an area that was in designated critical habitat for northern spotted owl as well. And when we went out there, we found that those late seral conditions were pretty present in these units that were designated LSRs. We brought that information to the Forest Service, and they pretty quickly dropped most of those units. It's kind of hard to tell on my screen, but the blank areas are where those units were dropped. And this is just another kind of classic example of what we find versus what is on paper, kind of not meshing with reality. I think Mia's going to talk a little bit more about this area, but there's on the left-hand side, this is a key from a timber sale map that shows the average ages of stands within the Wacoma timber sale. And the photo of the unit here was taken in a unit that, according to that map, was like in the 30-year range, which clearly is not. And this was an area that, among other ones, we ground truthed, and Forest Service recognizes this error among others and dropped this unit among other ones. And here they couldn't ecologically justify doing anything in there because the same issue with grasshopper, that it was in a late successional reserve. And last kind of example of types of trends and types of projects we're seeing, back to the grasshopper timber sale, which we ground truthed this last year. We're seeing more and more of these really huge linear fuel breaks being proposed. And so in grasshopper, there are all these units, all these areas in the timber sale that were these never logged, really old, high elevation, moist mixed conifer units that were slated to be logged to create this fuel break in order to suppress fire. The thing is, with this forest type, and I'm sure Paula experiences this in some of the higher elevation forests that she monitors, but these types of forests burn pretty infrequently compared to the lower elevation dry mixed conifer, and usually only under pretty severe fire weather. And so when they do burn, it's usually stand replacing. And mixed with that, we noticed when we went out that anyone could see where there was logging that had occurred nearby. It created these really dense young lodgepole pine dominated stands within a short amount of time, a decade or less, which is those types of stands carry fire at a much more readily than the older high elevation stands. And so these areas were in a national recreation area the Mountain Hood National Recreation Area, where legally the Forest Service can only log to establish the natural fire regime if they are using fire as a rationale. And so given that regime, we advocated that, you know, this fuel break wouldn't be effective most likely, and it could actually put firefighters at risk if it was used as a line of defense. And so given that argument and land allocation, the Forest Service ended up dropping much of this fuel break. And so yeah, those are kind of some overarching sort of also more recent examples of the types of issues that we're finding.
Great. Yeah, I think that, you know, we have that experience too a lot of the time where we'll you know, have this, because every timber sale, for folks who maybe aren't as steeped in this, every timber sale has like a statement in need, and oftentimes those are grounded in some like you know, some idea of conservation or restoration, and oftentimes when we go see what's on the ground, either it already looks great and is probably, you know, better off without any kind of harvest, or it's just totally the purpose and need statement is just totally kind of wacky and doesn't make any sense for the forest. So that's really great to hear kind of some of the stuff you've been finding there. And so I guess I'm curious, what are some of the tools and strategies that BARC uses to approach these projects?
Should I talk for a minute?
Yeah.
Well, I think that the use of volunteers is really important for BARC. I speak as a volunteer, so of course I want to acknowledge my own importance in this process. And how BARC uses volunteers is by providing us with a ton of training and opportunities to go out and practice and develop skills for doing ground truthing. So this is a nice panorama. At the upper left, we've got somebody measuring a slope using a clinometer. And then next to that is a volunteer identifying an unusual fungus that was a survey and manage. And then I can't see what that one is. Oh, then there's some folks out in the snow checking the canopy cover. And there's some folks looking at signs of wildlife use of an area, and then measuring a tree. So when I started volunteering a couple years ago with BARC, I was, you know, I hiked and went backpacking, was in the mountains all the time, but I'd never been trained in doing this work or any kind of activism. And as you said, Dylan, this is like the most fun kind of activism that I could possibly imagine. And so I had my pre-existing skill set in knowledge of the ecosystems of the forest, and with BARC's ground truth training. So I kind of started by learning just like how to go and collect information, how to go and start to like take the story of a forest and put it onto 2 pages, like get some information about a piece of this forest. And then continuing in the training that BARC gives to volunteers, then I started learning how to look at the proposal from the Forest Service and start to compare what they're saying with what we're seeing. And that's really, it can be pretty complicated, because there's what they're saying the conditions are, and then the conditions that we're seeing and how those differ. And that's one level, and it's really important to be able to start to see that level. And then going deeper to start to be able to read the purpose and need, that, you know, why they're saying they need to do this. Like, why does this forest need to be logged so it can be a healthier forest? And so BARC also offers continuing, like ongoing ecology club meetings where we can really deepen our knowledge from other volunteers or other experts about ecology of the forest. And then we can also with BARC get into learning how to participate in NEPA and how to write comments, participate in objections, taking it all the way to court. And so there's a lot that we as volunteers, we can take it pretty deep in learning how to do this work and engage in this work. And I've been working with some of the BARC staff and other volunteers to develop a NEPA training that we've been doing, that we had actually taken it on the road in the before the pandemic, out to some of the communities around Mount Hood, where in the communities that are right in the proposed zigzag timber sale. And so it was really exciting to take this NEPA comment training to folks who live there in the project area and help people start to know how to participate in NEPA. One thing, Michael, that I wanted to ask you to, can you go back to that picture with the roads? I think it was the third slide with that really good road that Grady's standing in. One thing that Michael and I were talking about is, yeah, that road right there in the Jazz, is that there's a timber sale right now that their EA isn't going to say where their proposed temporary roads are. They're just like, oh, well, we might put them here or here maybe. And you know, these are the roads that, like, we see a lot of roads like this, and it's really problematic for the Forest Service to be more and more just not saying where they're going to put proposed roads. So by having lots of people out in the field, getting lots of great photos like this, we can give some pretty strong pushback to stuff like that. So. Yeah, thanks.
Great. Yeah, and I just want to say, I mean, volunteers make the show go on for us with Cascadia Wildlands as well. And want to do a quick shout out to some of our all-star volunteers we've got on the line. You all know who you are. Great. Well, I really appreciate you both sharing that, and it's really amazing to see some of the work that's going on up in Mount Hood. And so now I want to introduce Paula Stone, who is Paul Hood, sorry, who's the co-director of the Blue Mountain Biodiversity Project that leads a lot of the forest defense work out east of the Cascades. And so they have a really huge kind of area that they cover. And yeah, so I'll just pass it off to Paula. Do you want to introduce yourself and you can get going?
Yeah, so I'm Paula Hood, and I'm she, her pronouns, and I'm co-director of Blue Mountains Biodiversity Project. And I'm going to take a second to share my screen here. Let's see. So I want to give just a bit of general background about Blue Mountains Biodiversity Project, because I think, especially for us, we're a pretty small grassroots organization, and we're a staff of 3, and we work out in Eastern Oregon, so a lot of folks aren't very familiar with us. But we work to defend ecosystem integrity on national forests and public lands in Eastern Oregon. BMBP has actually been around since 1991. We're founded by Karen Coulter and Asante Riverwind. And we are based in Fossil, Oregon, where our director, Karen Coulter, lives. So, and we focus on working to stop or significantly modify ecologically destructive logging in timber sales, also livestock grazing allotments, toxic herbicide and biocide use, and sometimes other projects that take place on federal lands. And we specifically work on the Deschutes, Ochako, Umatilla, and Malheur National Forests. Sometimes we'll go do some selected work on the Wallowa-Whitman, but we mostly focus on those other 4. We're out in the field with volunteers every year from the beginning of June through the end of September. So we've got quite a lot of ground to cover out there. And we field survey every timber sale, every major timber sale in our work area, and they tend to run large, the timber sales in Eastern Oregon. So let's see. So field surveying is absolutely the foundation of our forest defense work, and volunteers are absolutely the backbone of that field survey work. And so they cover thousands of acres of proposed logging every single year as BMBP volunteers. And the information that we collect out in the field directly influences the comments we submit to the Forest Service, and also is used as evidence in negotiations and potential litigation, similarly to BARC and other folks. And so we actually submit the field survey sheets and samplings of pictures with our comments at the time. And so we actually try to get these in as early as possible so that we can try to convince the forest, like, see, we've been out on the ground documenting, like what y'all are describing also as these discrepancies between the reality of the ground and what's described in NEPA documents, and as well as just documenting and fighting for ecological gems and important wildlife habitat and things like that. And we've, through this process, we've effectively stopped or significantly modified many thousands of acres of timber sales, and also managed to set beneficial and important legal precedent. And so, you know, we have quite a bit of on-the-ground familiarity and deep connections with these forests in Eastern Oregon that we survey. And we've been able to document high-quality wildlife habitat and forest types, and use that information to highlight a lot of our concerns surrounding the degradation that can and does take place in many of these areas, and the ecological destruction should these timber sales go forth, or when they do. So we host volunteers from across the country, abroad, and we absolutely could not accomplish the work that we do with them without the amazing hard work put in by our volunteers. And we strive for diversity and inclusivity in this work. We also recognize that in the environmental community, and that includes BMBP, there's a lot of ongoing work to do in order to be truly inclusive. And so BMBP wants to take a moment here and acknowledge that in the forest defense community, we've historically struggled with social justice issues. And so people of color, Indigenous folks, and trans and non-binary folks of all races have often been excluded and marginalized. And this is something that we all need to be better about. And so in light of that right now, BMBP particularly wants to acknowledge that so many of the folks who make our work possible are folks who are trans and non-binary. And that trans and non-binary folks are really just a core and huge part of BMBP's beloved community, and have contributed extraordinary talent and skills and hard work to BMBP. And so we want to make a point of thanking and honoring them for their passion and hard work, and recognize that trans and non-binary folks of all races and ethnicities have really truly been a vital part of forest defense from the beginning. And so, you know, we are of course very grateful to all of our volunteers. They literally keep us going, both organizationally, but also as a personal inspiration for our small staff. And so, you know, the volunteers that we have out are absolutely essential for my personal inspiration and Karen Coulter, and are just, you know, absolutely central to our work. And so, you know, we wanted to highlight all of this because BMBP relies so heavily on our volunteers, and just emphasize that we're committed to doing the work to break down transphobia, racism, and ableism in forest defense. And we want people to read our inclusivity policy on our website and come out and volunteer with us. So that's some general background, and getting a little bit more into specifics. And so when folks come out, we train them in map and compass skills and plant and animal ID, policy issues, documenting forest conditions, because most of our work takes place in such remote locations that are really far away from dense population centers, especially left-leaning dense population centers that tend to be more on the west side of the Cascades. It really makes it pretty impossible to have day trips or even weekend trips or very short trips out to the woods. And so we've designed our field survey program to be much more geared towards spending longer periods of time in the field. It's sort of just a necessity in the way that we work and where we work. And so when volunteers come out, we ask that they come out for at least a week at a time generally. And part of this is also because it takes at least a couple of days to train volunteers generally. And many people come out for multiple weeks, and it's just a wonderful way to get to know people and to build community. And also because we're out so immersed so completely in the woods, we really get a chance to see some amazing wildlife. So that's fun too. Yeah, so that's a bit about us.
Great. And just, out of curiosity, so much of the work that is being done by Cascadia Wildlands, I mean, almost exclusively is on the west side of the Cascades. So I'd love to just hear some of the kind of challenges specific to the east side of the Cascades and those forests right now, and maybe just give us an overview of what that kind of management landscape looks like.
So as I alluded to, organizing in remote and rural locations that are far away from many of the more densely populated population centers, especially densely populated population centers on the west side, can be really challenging. And it's hard for folks to get out to those areas. And so also I think that partly because these areas are often so remote, it's hard to draw easily on a volunteer base. It just presents certain logistical challenges. But we, as stated, have amazing volunteers that are so dedicated that, we really make it happen, but it certainly can be logistically challenging. And then also, because so many of the areas that we work in are remote, I think that a lot of people just aren't very aware of what's going on out there. And I think the Forest Service tends to know that. And so, especially in some of the more remote locations, I think that the Forest Service sometimes can sort of feel like they can, get away with more. And then also there's, in Eastern Oregon, I think because of some of these dynamics, there's really been an increase in the size and pace and scale of logging in the last several years, even before the Trump administration happened. But now it's, of course, much, much worse, as Michael was alluding to. The amount of timber being directed to be cut off the Forest Service and public lands has gotten even larger. But just to give you an idea of the scale of, of timber sales out there. So average timber sales run between 5,000 and 15,000 acres of commercial logging. Some are smaller for sure, and then some are much larger. And so, like, for example, the Austin timber sale has a proposed 28,000 acres of commercial logging in that one timber sale. And that is part of a series of large back-to-back sales that equal approximately 49,900 acres of commercial logging. And this is either very recently, like in the process of being logged, or has recently been logged, or is currently being proposed. So this huge amount of impact in one watershed. This is all along the middle fork of the John Day River. So, in the middle fork of the John Day River watershed. And so the cumulative impacts of that kind of large scale logging in Eastern Oregon, I don't think people are especially aware of. And so that is definitely a challenge that we're facing out there. And then also, Michael alluded to this, there's a lot of public worry about wildfire and misinformation. And so we have a lot of challenges about that and how they're intertwined with logging and issues of controversy, especially on the east side of the Cascades. And I don't know. Okay. And one of the most, so, you know, we're facing really a lot of large scale logging projects. And also one of the most concerning issues that we're dealing with right now has come up in a particular way very recently. And that is that the Forest Service just very recently, this month, publicly initiated the process to roll back their protections on logging large trees on 6 national forests in Eastern Oregon. And so this was also alluded to, but you know, on the west side of the Cascades, you have the Northwest Forest Plan within the range of spotted owls. On the east side, there's only a very small sliver of where that is true. We don't have the Northwest Forest Plan in most of the east side of Oregon. And so instead we have the east side screens and packfish and infish. It's kind of our equivalent of some of those environmental protections. And they came into existence at around the same time, generally through litigation. And so as part of the east side screens, on the east side, the Forest Service isn't supposed to log trees that are greater than or equal to 21 inches. And unfortunately, they've been logging those trees right along, usually through abusing loopholes. And so we have challenged this abuse and this continued logging of large trees that the Forest Service has been doing. And in 2014, we and our allies actually won a big district court case about it, the Snow Basin case. And this was brought by Blue Mountains Biodiversity Project and Greater Hells Canyon Council and Earthrise Law Center. And so now that the Forest Service, this is all in play, they're attempting to rewrite these protections and roll them back. And they haven't laid out the absolute specifics of their plans and kind of claim that they don't really have a plan yet. But based on all of our experience, all the logging, or not all, but most of the logging that they've proposed in many of these large timber sales, and how they've done their public presentations and the signs they've presented and the topics of conversation and everything else points to that they're going to try to change these protections so that they can log trees that are larger than 21 inches in diameter. And of course, more of them. That will increase the logging of large trees. And so, you know, we're of course really worried about the loss of incredibly crucial wildlife habitat that this will bring. And I should say that part of the reason that this protection got put in place on the east side is because, particularly on the east side, there was a huge deficit in large tree structure, you know, when all this was being examined in the mid-90s. And so it was determined through a lot of scientific research that was well documented and well accepted that, you know, the east side had, because of past logging, a severe deficit of large trees. And so, you know, that is also really important for like snags and down wood and wood that goes into streams. And so the rollback of some of these protections, you know, it's only been 25 years. A lot of these haven't had a chance to grow, and the Forest Service has been logging these trees in many sales anyway. So, so yeah, we're really worried about the loss of wildlife habitat, the loss of carbon sequestration, you know, the loss of snags, down wood, and also, you know, just feel like there's going to be a lot more impacts to water quality and, you know, connectivity and other sorts of issues from increased logging. And that also, you know, I think another really important thing to remember is that climate change has, of course, many ways that it's negatively impacting forests. And so increasing the logging of these forests often is going to exacerbate those same negative impacts. So like, you know, for example, impacts to stream temperatures and water quality, to wildlife habitat, things like this. So, so we're really worried about all that. And, you know, from our on the ground experience in the region since 1991, we have a lot of documentation in our field surveys and sheets and pictures. And a lot of that information really helps to demonstrate, you know, and here's a couple of examples, how these large trees are really vital to protecting logging and sequestering carbon, and, you know, just what amazing, beautiful areas they are too. So yeah, we're trying to defend those standards, and that's a big part of what we're focusing on for right now, as well as the usual work we're doing. And so we hope folks are going to keep an eye out for this issue in particular, and hopefully visit our website and sign up for action alerts and stay engaged on this particular topic. And of course, like, I'm also, you know, if anybody is really interested in finding out more about this and the nitty gritty, I'm definitely available. You know, get in touch with us through our website or through other things, because of course, as with many forest issues, there is a complex ball of issue to untangle in some of the more detailed aspects of the discussion. So.
Great. Thank you so much, Paula. And we'll send out a follow-up email with some kind of like actionable items for folks from both BARC and Blue Mountain Biodiversity Project, and ways to get more involved with links to their websites as well. So everyone can stay tuned for that. And if Paula, if you're interested in Michael too, we could share your emails or your contacts so folks could get directly in touch with you. Great. And so now I have the pleasure of introducing my colleague, Sam Krop, who really helped with inspiration from both BARC and Blue Mountain Biodiversity Project, helped get Cascadia Wildlands field checking team up and started. And so Sam, do you want to, I mean, you can give a quick introduction maybe to yourself and a little bit of the work that Cascadia Wildlands does, although I'm sure most of these folks are familiar, and then we can just jump right into some of the field checking we're doing.
Sure. And if you could make me a co-host so I can share my screen, that would be awesome too.
You can be the host now.
Hey everybody, my name is Sam Krop. As Dylan said, I have been the grassroots organizer with Cascadia. This is actually my last week with Cascadia, and I'm transitioning. So I'm really glad to be here. Kind of like Dylan said, I just want to give a huge shout out to BARC and Blue Mountain Biodiversity Project for the amazing work you all do. It seriously has been an inspiration in so many ways to the work that we do with the WildCAT team, so thank you. I am going to go ahead and share my screen now so you all can see. I put together a lot of like a lot of tree photos, which I know that we all have been seeing a lot of, but they're so beautiful. I couldn't help myself. So let's see, share screen. There we go. Can you all see that?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So I just threw this picture in here too, because, and before we kind of launch in, Dylan, I threw this picture in here too because to tell the story a little bit about Cascadia Wildlands. This is from 2002. It was the Little River demo timber sale, successfully halted through a bunch of field checking, grassroots efforts, and litigation. And so I think that's really where Cascadia's work comes into play in the same way that Blue Mountain and BARC does, is we're using the tactics of field checking and litigation and also grassroots organizing to protect the places we love. And this picture too was from a while ago, and Cascadia's had a really rich and robust field checking and grassroots arm for a long time. However, as we kind of came into middle age as an organization, we developed more of a leaning towards the legal framework and less of a focus on boots on the ground sort of field work until we brought on a grassroots organizer position and we got to actually dream about what it looks like to have volunteers on the ground again. And so in the past 3 years, we have had the WildCAT volunteer team, the Cascadia Action Team. And I think I'm going to just share a little bit about what we've been doing in the field checking work that we do, which is on the west side of the Cascades, pretty much in Bureau of Land Management and Forest Service land of all kinds, from just south of Portland to the Oregon-California border. Dylan, do you want me to go ahead and just jump into the meat of it?
Yeah, so I mean, you want to just tell us a little bit more about the role that field checking plays in the Cascadia WildCAT volunteer team?
I would love to. So today we have a really beautiful, robust volunteer program. Again, shout out to you amazing people for all of the incredible work that everyone is doing. Like I said, we've been serving timber sales on Bureau of Land Management and Forest Service land on a lot of different kinds of landscapes, similar to what others have talked about. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the kinds of proposals we're seeing because it is very similar, especially to what Michael talked about with BARC. We're seeing a number of timber sales proposed in the name of restoration, which are obviously we have to look closely at those. We're seeing a number proposed in the name of fire prevention, and more just sales for the sake of timber revenue, which is always our favorite. So this is just a picture of some field checking work that we did in a timber sale on the Mackenzie River, a current active sale, Forest Service, the flat country timber sale. So typically just how our process has worked is we have a really beautiful and growing team, and that has kind of forced us to systematize what the heck we're doing. So the way that we've been doing this, and I am always really excited to talk about systems with people if others have good ideas. I'm really into systems, but the way that we've been doing is we get these, so what you're looking at here is a timber sale map. We saw a couple of these on the other presentations. We get this thing, this is a 33,000 acre timber sale. So kind of like what Paula was just talking about, what Michael was talking about, definitely trends toward bigger timber sales on a landscape level with less complex analysis. So this was all mostly remote sensing technology surveys, super fun. They think that they can explain what's happening on the ground via technology. And so this is really the value of field checking. As others have said, we go in and we try and see what's there. So we get a map like this and we do some of our own analysis, trying to figure out where the units are that we want to visit. This is a picture of a LiDAR layer mapped on top of a timber sale. LiDAR is just, it's a light sensing technology that allows you to see via color differences the height of trees in an area. And so on this map, the darker orange is the taller trees, and the lighter yellow and green is the lower trees. So that's one way where we're like, oh, well, maybe we'll go here to some of the older, nicer forests. But also, obviously, things are different when you get on the ground, and that's what it's all about. So when we get on the ground, like has been mentioned, we're looking for specific things. The picture that I just showed was a snapshot of the Avenza mapping system, which is just one GIS system that we can use to record the data that we find in the field and drop pins and then figure out site-specific information later. So this is some of the stuff we look for. We found this really incredible creek in the middle of the flat country timber sale on the left. So we pinned that and documented it and made sure that the Forest Service knew about that later. On the right, this is one of my all-time favorite pictures, and potentially one of my all-time favorite finds on the Jordan Cove pipeline route, just 300 feet south of the proposed pipeline, frac gas pipeline. This waterfall we just kind of stumbled across in the middle of a timber sale that also happened to be on the pipeline route. So lots of interesting things to be found out there and documented. Other things we look for, obviously, differences in how the landscape has been affected by natural conditions. So on the left, we've got a really beautiful meadow. Again, not on the timber sale proposal, but obviously a really beautiful and noteworthy natural phenomena. And on the right, we have a fire-burned forest. This was actually taken from the Highway 46 timber sale near Brighton Bush Hot Springs Resort. And this one, we actually successfully managed to cut off a number of these fire-burned units because we were able to argue that the fire had done the work of logging, restoration logging, for the Forest Service. So that was a good little win, or at least a compromise. We won't call it a win. But other things, we look for, animal stuff, obviously evidence of habitat, and then flagging human activity, stuff that's going on out there. And the biggest thing that we do is we try to build community. Hey, Michael, you're in this photo. This was from our base camp, which was our first ever base camp, inspired by Bark heavily. And I haven't been out to BMBP's base camp yet, but I really would love to. And this is really, to me, the most important part about what we do is just getting community members into the woods and creating a relationship with place. This is just a small sliver of our WildCAT team, and I'm really thankful that we've been able to recruit folks not just from people who look like me and who are of the same age as me and who have the same background as me, but we've been really reaching out to as many folks as possible to bring people into this movement and to offer opportunities to plug in. So that has been, to me, the most rewarding and wonderful part about this work.
And that's a nice segue into the next question, which is, Cascadia does a lot of work kind of tying that place-based organizing in with these field checking trips. So do you want to talk a little bit more about how we use traditional grassroots tactics to make our finds in the field more effective and just really matter to the general public? And I also want to do just a quick time check. Sam, we got like 5 more minutes, and then I want to leave 5 minutes for questions for folks. And you're muted. Sam, you're muted. Still muted. Still muted.
Okay, can you hear me now? Hello? Hello? Okay, weird. I think I was just muted by the host, Dylan, but no, I think it works now. Cool. So I'm gonna go really fast. I've got some examples though that I wanna share from site-specific stuff. I'm gonna skip through a couple slides because what I really wanna share, the example I really wanna share, although this is a really beautiful photo of a 72-inch diameter cedar. But the photo that I really want to share and the example is from the Thurston Hills timber sale. So like Dylan said, Cascadia has kind of specialized lately in really trying to amplify our site-specific timber sale work with traditional grassroots organizing tactics. And this has worked really well with the local timber sale. This is small change in terms of timber sales. It's only like 100 acres in the grand scheme of things. It is only 100 acres, but it's in the backyard of Springfield residents. And they're planning to clear cut and increase fire hazard in this area. And it's also a proposed recreation area. And so what we did is a lot of field checking, looking for old legacy trees. We did a lot of just kind of visiting and celebrating the recreational aspects of this place. We took a lot of trips out there. I think like, over 50 to 75 people, just in different trips that we've done originally. We protested the Bureau of Land Management when they auctioned off the sale. We actually went inside to the auction and protested them. Questionably effective, but very cathartic. We went door knocking, and this is really important, recruiting and talking to people who are directly impacted by proposals like this. So before COVID, we met a lot of people. After COVID, we did a lot of phone banking in those communities. We also organized with other allies. We organized with university students to do kind of like an awareness tree sit about forest and climate defense, highlighting the Thurston Hill sale. Organized a mass bike ride and a town hall, published a bunch of letters to the editor, and kind of just threw all the tactics out there to try and highlight this issue. And when we won the case, which we did back in September, there was a lot of community opposition behind it. But the case was reintroduced by the Bureau of Land Management because environmental law is flawed. And it was reintroduced quite recently, and just last week the Bureau of Land Management announced that they are returning to the same old proposal. They're trying to do the same thing. So this is our community members back in the sale a while ago. So the beautiful thing that I just want to highlight now, and it's kind of a bittersweet story because this has happened. This is logging that has happened to create logging roads in the Thurston Hills area, even though we won the lawsuit. And the BLM introduced the same exact proposal. This logging has already taken place. But the most beautiful and wonderful thing is that we now, thanks to all this grassroots work, have a really, really awesome community of people who are opposed to the sale. And so lately we've been getting calls from landowners and neighbors in the Thurston Hills area who are organizing themselves, which is amazing. We're getting calls from like some of my old high school students who are suddenly finding out about this and want to get involved and live in the Springfield area. People are self-organizing to put pressure on elected officials. So we're kind of just doing all of the things, and I genuinely think that we are going to win. And so this is kind of what I want to leave it at, I guess, is just the beauty of overlaying not just this hands-on field work, which is super incredible for building relationship to place, but also stressing the need and the love of these places in traditional grassroots tactics and amplifying at least, you know, the needs of these places because they can't advocate for themselves. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sam. And I just want to add to, you know, in my experience volunteering with BARC and with Cascadia Wildlands, just a really excellent way to empower community members to have, you know, some kind of autonomy in the management of public lands and to engage people who might otherwise not see an easy route for engagement in what can be, in my opinion, sometimes like overly complex and maybe intentionally complex processes to further alienate folks. So just a really amazing way in. And if anyone is interested in learning more about this movement, I think that field checking is one of the best kind of starting points. And so want to direct all of you to some of the amazing work that our allies are doing up in Mount Hood with BARC, and then on the east side with Blue Mountain Biodiversity Project. So with that, I want to briefly open it up for questions, and then just also note that I'll send out more info and some next steps and how to get involved with BARC, Blue Mountain, and Cascadia on their field checking stuff. And I want to pass it to Dave really quickly so he can talk a little bit about his stream restoration project and ask his question to Michael.
Can you hear me? Looks like I'm muted.
You're good.
Okay, well, I'm president of Friends of Douglas Fir National Monument, and I'm also a Wildcat. So what I'm doing is looking at the shot cast timber sale, which has already happened, and there are stream buffers in the timber sale. So I've gone out and I'm photographing all the areas that they're supposed to stay out of. And I informed BLM that we're doing this for the record or future reference. So I'm wondering, is anybody else looking at that sort of thing? We're going to go back out after the timber is cut and make sure they didn't cut into the stream buffers.
Yeah, I can jump in. BARC has done some of that work in the past. We're not currently doing a project that's exactly like that, but a good place to start would be to look at the DEA, the environmental analysis for that project, because that'll hopefully have some of the stream buffer sizes that you're looking for, because it can really vary based off of whether it's a perennial versus an intermittent stream, sometimes what the slope is of that stream. So it helps to be able to have a little bit of an idea of how to estimate slope. And then also how far, I'm not sure exactly where this timber sale is, but if it's near listed fish, but it'll vary also based off of how far away from listed fish habitat, or if there is listed fish habitat in the stream.
And I'm using a map that shows the stream buffers. Is that not enough?
Sorry, I think I didn't quite hear that.
Okay, am I unmuted now?
You're unmuted.
Okay, I'm using the stream buffer map that came with that timber sale. And is that not enough to hold them accountable?
Well, yeah, I think it depends. I think it depends on the project that you're talking about and when that map was produced. Sometimes the timber sale maps can change a little bit from, you know, the beginning of the analysis to the actual contract maps. The best maps that I found for doing this kind of work have been if you can dig out the contract maps that the Forest Service has post, or I guess in this case, I'm not sure how the BLM organizes these on their website, but if you're able to acquire those, that's probably the best stream buffer map that you could find. And one other thing is the BLM and the Forest Service don't always do the best job of locating and buffering the entire stream network. And so make sure to be paying attention to that when you're out too. And also paying attention to what type of year that you're going out, because depending on what type of year, you're going to see different amounts of water throughout the season. So
great. And Dave and Michael, maybe y'all could connect offline if that was all right with you, Michael. We could share your email with Dave and get some more input on that. So we have 1 more minute. Does anyone else have any last questions before we wrap things up? All right. Well, I just want to say a huge thank you to our guest speakers, Michael and Mia with BARC, and Paula with Blue Mountain Biodiversity Project, and Sam, soon to be with CSE, but we've got it for a little longer. And also a huge thank you to all of our lovely volunteers who were able to make it on this call, and then everyone for joining us. We really, really appreciate it, and we hope to see you out in the field. We've got a social distancing protocol, so it's totally safe. And we, thought through a lot of this stuff. So definitely opportunities to get outside, hang out far away from people, but still get to hang out and get some human interaction and some forest interaction. So thank you all, and we'll send out an email follow-up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.